everybody. Welcome back to episode, I think this is 7 of Depression Vacation. I always forget what episode it is every
I'm
time.
sorry, I'm just thrown off by like the dead look in your eye before like you went hello, and I was like, oh shit, he has no soul.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
Just to explain what happened, like right before we were doing this, Shannon and I were discussing like I do talk a lot louder. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a loud talker. But my voice volume doesn't change as much because I don't get as excitable. However, Shannon's voice changes a little bit depending on how excited or how like invigorated she gets about the controversial topics we're talking about. So sometimes I have to adjust that. So yeah, I decided to throw my own observation into the loop there.
It was terrifying.
Yeah, and it's especially the worst thing to hear for whoever's actually listening to this podcast is to have your ears wrong. Like, were you ever a Gilmore Girls watcher at all?
No, not when it came out. I did start watching it during the pandemic because I was like, oh, I've never seen Gilmore Girls, and I'm here alone by myself, and so I'll give it a shot. And I think I've gotten to like season 2 or 3, so not religiously and not continuously.
I used to be religiously into Gilmore Girls. Like, I watched it every year. Parts of the show have not particularly aged well, so actually, like, a couple of years ago, I stopped giving it a rewatch every year because I was like, I've had enough of these Gilmore Girls. But the thing that reminded me of is, like, in season 4, Luke, who's like, you know, Luke.
Yeah.
He decides he really loves Lorelai, but has been repressing these feelings, and decides to get these self-help love books on audio tape to guide him through his feelings, which for 2003, that was actually a fairly progressive thing for a gruff man to be doing on TV. But the first tape he plays just starts off, he hits the play button, and it's like, love! So hard that it like hurts his ears and scares him.
Oh my gosh, that sounds about right.
Yeah, so that's what that thing reminded me of.
Yeah. Anyway, welcome to Depression Vacation.
yeah. Where we talk about things that are bumming us out for about the next 58 minutes, because Hal wasted 2 minutes talking about Gilmore Girls and explaining his weird decision. I think that's a lot of my life, though, is just explaining my weird decisions.
Yeah, I feel that.
I had one girlfriend at one point tell me, which this was somewhat valid too, that she didn't care what the reasons why I did things were, because I felt like an overarching need to explain why I did certain weird things and what my thought process was. And at some point,
that actually makes me kind of sad. Like, I'm the kind of person that I feel that I need to explain things sometimes because my brain jumps from one thing to the next so quickly. I'll realize that something I'm about to say or do is entirely out of context as to what everyone else agrees that the situation is. So I end up being like, okay, before I continue, let me guide you through the process. And I don't know, when people have told me, like, you know, it's okay, you can do the weird thing. Like, that's one thing, but also, like, I'm just like, I don't really care how you got there. It's like, yeah, but I actually think it's kind of interesting that that's how my brain went, and I want you to hear about it, goddammit.
So it's refreshing to hear that, like, somebody else also appreciates that, because this was a relationship I was not a particularly good person in. Didn't have a lot of real, like, relationship experience at the time because of stunted growth and development and all that. And so, like, a lot of the decisions I made were very poor relationship decisions, which, again, I realized way too late, but, you know, they still spurned growth later in life. But so I'm inclined to believe that every time I was trying to explain a certain thing to this particular girlfriend that I was probably in the wrong, just because of the nature of how the relationship went. So it's refreshing to hear that maybe I wasn't 100% in the wrong.
No, I wouldn't say so. Well, dang, that's sad.
That's depressing on an episode of Depression Vacation.
Wow, that's so original for us.
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of glad that you brought up like relationships and love and things, is because the reason why I didn't leave the house when I intended to is because I started watching season 3 of Love is Blind.
Oh, my sisters love this show.
I love the show. So one of my guilty pleasures is like reality television. Mm-hmm. I low-key love it. It's something about it tickles the right parts of my brain, and I enjoy watching it. It's kind of an odd thing for me because I tend to be overly critical and kind of snobbish about the things that I watch and read and things like that. So it is kind of out of character when people hear that I love things like that. They're just like, Shannon, that kind of goes against everything you stand for. And I'm like, you know what? I know that.
Sometimes you just need trash reality TV.
Right. Like... So I've watched so the first 2 seasons of Love is Blind. Right before coming here, I just finished episode 2. He's adjusting me again. I can see it already.
Calling me out for my constructive production behavior.
But anyway, I just finished up episode 2 before coming here, and of course they left it on a cliffhanger. And I'm just like, God damn it, now I have to go record a podcast, and I'll be thinking the entire time about whether or not she says yes. That's what I'm going to be worried about.
As you were saying that, too, I just want to make a correction, because as you were discussing, like, trash reality dating TV, I don't think my sister's actually like Love is Blind. I think it's The Bachelor I'm thinking about. And I just get all of these. I don't watch any of these shows, so they all just get amalgamated in my brain.
That's fair. I've never actually seen The Bachelor, and I feel weird if I were to like jump into it now. It's kind of like Grey's Anatomy, where it's just been going on too long, and I feel like the boat has passed for me to enjoy it and be a fan of it.
Yeah, The Bachelor is like, that is a very, I've heard a couple of different stories from different angles of friends who've worked in reality TV with me about The Bachelor, and that's kind of like with Survivor, that's like one of the highest profile productions in all of reality TV in Hollywood, and I guess by extension in the world. And I do remember when I was out in LA, my friend Cindy had a friend in one of her circles that actually had been in like a audition finalist for a couple of seasons to be on The Bachelor. I think she eventually did get on, and out of curiosity, because she was at my friend Cindy's wedding and I met her, I did check to see that she eventually did get on the show and got like voted out in the first or second episode. But Cindy had said that like the audition process, like they flew her to so many different places to meet so many different executives, and it was very grueling. And then she was not selected for like several of the seasons. And that kind of shocked me because like Survivors kind of was famously like, oh, we're just doing auditions at malls across the country. But The Bachelor like is a very involved process to make sure, I guess, not just get good looking women and men for The Bachelorette, but like the right kind of ones that present themselves well on television.
Well, and that's another interesting thing is I auditioned for The Voice a few years back.
Ooh.
Obviously didn't get on the show. But one of the things that because every time I go to do something, I research the hell out of it. So I've auditioned for The Voice. I've taken like the Jeopardy test.
Jeopardy test so many times.
I know. And so when I go to do those things, I tend to research them, little tips and things you should expect. And basically one of the things about The Voice was like, they're not just looking for if you have a good voice, they're looking for someone who presents well on television and also has a good story.
Story is paramount. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned The Voice because I would assume at this point, because it's been on the air for like 11 or 12 years, that it's changed at this point. But I had a friend, Ange in Hollywood, who worked like audience stuff for everything. And I remember on the first season of The Voice, I recognized Raquel Castro from that season, specifically because she had been the little girl in the Kevin Smith movie Jersey Girl. And I remember that name, and I was like, I wonder if that's the same Raquel Castro. And it was. And my friend Ange had told me that, like, at the early points of The Voice, everybody who was on the show was actually somebody who was under a recording contract already. But it was like one of these many seeds they plant that they just weren't doing anything with. So they decided, why don't we start a reality singing show and just use all these acts that are under contract that we have nobody's doing anything with. And apparently that was like a super popular forum. There were a couple of people I recognized on that show, too. Like, I ran in my early years in LA, I ran into a girl named Sam Beheimer, who was one of the most incredible voices in, like, piano, like, rock sort of things. I got my sisters into her, too, because she was, like, amazing. And then I was trying to turn a friend of mine on to her, like, years later, and I Googled her, and I was like, oh, she was on The Voice, season, like, 11 or something. So it's kind of cool to see all these, like, I don't know. It's always fun when you make connections like that where I've seen this person before. And
yeah, that happened to me. So I don't watch The Voice regularly. Mostly after the auditions, I don't really watch if I bother to watch at all because the auditions are my favorite part. They're the most moving for me because then you get the people who get like the golden buzzer or they all say yes and you see how happy they are. So that's what I watch when I need to feel something inside. And so I auditioned for The Voice and I obviously didn't make it on. I made a lot of mistakes in that audition process because it was in Philly. I drove to Philly. I got pulled over on the way because I was speeding.
But that's your story right there.
I was like, well, listen to this shit here. So, and then I get in line and I was in line all day.
Mm-hmm.
like 9 hours. I was standing in that line and like slowly moving through the process. And some people ahead and behind me, they were like, "Hey, we've done this before, and this is like the slowest they've ever." And I'm like, "Of course." The one time I decided to audition for The Voice, but I just didn't plan it well, and the song that I chose wasn't really me. It wasn't my sound.
I was going to ask,
and
what song did you sing?
I sang Titanium.
Can you hum a few bars here? I don't.
Yeah. Bulletproof, nothing to lose. I am titanium. It's David Guetta.
I've heard that name, so.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean it's not really the music I usually go for. I tend to lean more towards like classic rock. Most of the songs I do well are sung by men. So it's just where my comfort level is. But I mean, I have a very wide range. So, and I wasn't the best singer in the room. I wasn't the worst singer in the room, but I just wasn't strong enough, and it wasn't my sound. So that's the story of how I auditioned for The Voice and got nothing out of it. Instead, I got like a $200 ticket.
Oh, gee. In all the years I've known you, I did not know that you auditioned for The Voice. So that's a very interesting story. Did you ever, the Jeopardy test is more interesting to me because I am obsessed with Jeopardy. Was that something that you got any sort of callback or audition
No.
for? Oh.
But I'm still working on it. Every once in a while, I'm like, I should take that test, because it used to be you had to take the test during a certain time frame. Now you can take the test anytime.
Yeah, it's like you can take it every so many months.
Yeah.
In fact, I haven't taken it in about a year, so I'm definitely due for at least another one. Because I remember that was a big deal when they issued like the Jeopardy Anytime test, because the other ones I had to like be online in a queue at a certain time, and they were very strict about it.
Yeah.
So
I remember that. That was something I think they took the pandemic to roll out.
yeah.
Because I think that just they wanted it to be a little more accessible. Yeah.
It was I could talk about Jeopardy for hours, and these are in
Yeah.
fact, like that's a good conversation I get into with some of my witnesses sometimes for the lottery, because a lot of them also enjoy Jeopardy. That's the only reason my aunt and uncle know I'm on TV for the lottery, is because Jeopardy comes on directly after the lottery in Pittsburgh.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. But it's my favorite question and answer show. Have you watched any of the celebrity stuff that's come up recently?
Just some clips on TikTok have come up. I think I want to say Steve Martin was on there recently.
I haven't seen. So they only do an episode like a week there, and I haven't seen the most recent ones. But who's with Reggie Watts was one I saw. The guy who plays Shang-Chi. A lot of randos. So, Andy Richter was on an episode, and he lost because he like decimated the other Celebrity Jeopardy appearance he had, and he amazingly lost to Shang-Chi. So, and the 10 rings. I don't know.
Yeah,
I haven't
it's
seen
the
it.
10 rings. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that's really cool. It's nice that you audition for so many things.
Yeah, I like to, shoot my shot on that kind of thing, because I see it much like the lottery is. Like, the worst I can do is try, and then if I don't get it, I don't get it. I get an experience, I get a good story.
A $200 ticket.
A $200 ticket, apparently. I mean, shout out to that guy, though, because he definitely did not give me as much of a ticket as I should have. So.
Really? $200 is not as much of a ticket as you should have gotten?
Oh, yeah, no. He got me for, I was like hella speeding. And
Okay.
he got me he was like, I'm just going to write you up for a violation of a turnpike regulation. And I'm like, what does that mean? And he was like, don't worry about it. And it's kind of funny when they do that kind of thing, is because, they take the thing that you did and they're like, no, I'm going to write you up for this. So it's not like you can go back and say, like, no, I didn't do that, because they'll be like, you're right. You did the much worse thing. So let's do that.
I feel like whenever that happens, because I feel like that's happened to me every single ticket I've ever gotten. And I feel like every one of them is like the cop is literally good cop, bad copying themselves in that situation. I'm like, oh, yeah, I caught you. You're in trouble. But oh wait, here, no, I'll give you failure to obey a posted speed limit as opposed to speeding, and you're so grateful that you got the lesser of the two that you're not gonna like challenge it or like, I don't know, be angry or anything.
It's just gonna come, because they still put it in the notes of like what you actually did, like it's still on the ticket, as far as my experience of it. And so, I mean, like, you can't really say anything. And what's even worse is not once have I ever talked myself out of a ticket. You'd think me, of all people, would have that ability. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's my face or the way I come across. But I've never been able to talk myself out of a ticket.
Oh, you've got a great face, Shannon. It's definitely not the face. So,
dude, I don't know.
Yeah, I remember the one stand-up bit that you told about like some rando that you matched with. This was like years ago, being like, "Oh, stupid face is like or something like
He
that."
called me a goofy-faced cunt. I
Yeah,
will remember that for the rest of my days.
I think that was the first time I ever saw you do stand-up. Was you said that particular thing, and it always sat like. I feel like everybody I do stand-up with has at least one bit that I always super remember that they tell. That I always thought was super, super funny. And for you, that's one of them. There's like a couple of other ones too, like that I'll always remember that Shannon Fields has told in stand up.
Well, good. I'm glad I have memorable bits. That's like half the battle, I guess.
There definitely are some. Oh, sorry, some
There's
comedians.
There's a cough button, Hal.
I know, but it's so.
You tell me about it all the time.
I
pulled this closer to me.
Well, look at you. Your arms work just fine. You happy? Hey, the cough button works, everybody. Yeah, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, like comedians, like, it's always, there are definitely some people that I could not tell you a single bit that they've ever told or joke, but I feel like all the ones that I see pretty regularly, I have at least one memorable story from.
I think I bullied someone out of the Harrisburg, the HMAC open mic.
Oh no!
And it might have been on purpose, but I was hosting and he got me all confused and messed up my lineup, that I painstakingly put in order, and I roasted him about it, and then he never came back.
Aw. Well, I mean, on some level, you have to have thicker skin, I guess, than just being roasted by the host to do things. I almost never get roasted by any of the, and I'm sure anybody listening to this is now going to roast me if they are the host of a thing. But like, I don't know if it's just sometimes my jokes are fairly unmemorable or there's just nothing to say about, but nobody has ever really made fun of me.
No, because you're just so nice.
Well, I remember the first stand-up competition I ever did, which was the ones that Gary Limoges used to host over at Champions. Who was it? It was like Eric, Damien, and I think Steve Studio were the judges. I'm sorry, and they were bantering with everybody and like making fun of their jokes. And I always remember after I went, I felt like I had a decent set, and they didn't make fun of me at all. And I'm like, I feel super left out here.
Oh no, they didn't make fun of you. Oh, that reminds me of the time. So I did the American Idol experience in Disney. And I got on. So you audition, and then if you get on, they have like shows periodically throughout the day. So I was on one of the day shows, and then the winners of each of those shows all go to like a final at the end of the day, and then if you win the final, you get a golden ticket to go to a real American Idol audition and like skip to the front of the line.
Ooh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, well, it didn't happen to me, but so I was there. It was my first time in Disney because I was poor. And I only got to go because it was the my high school marching band like senior trip. Like we went down to Disney in like 90-degree weather in our polyester uniforms, and we had to march down Main Street. And I wore like nothing under my uniform because I was dying. And the one thing about Disney is if you march in Disney, you cannot have more than, I think it's 6 seconds of not playing in between songs. And so we had to play over and over and over again. And so it was nonstop. By the end of it, I couldn't hit my last note. And I very quickly got tired of Ghostbusters. And yeah. And the other part of it is, too, that when you march in Disney, you can't play a Disney song.
Oh.
Because there could be an issue, it messes up the illusion of, the Disney being kind of like its own thing.
You'd think that Disney would want you to play, I guess, more of their, like, I'm not sure what the copyright logistics of playing in a marching band are, but I would assume that, like, movies that they don't own the rights to would have been more problematic than, say, playing We Don't Talk About Bruno going through the Magic Kingdom.
It's something about, like, maintaining the quality because you're relying on, like, a high school marching band. So, if it doesn't sound Disney, then that could potentially cause a problem.
That's the most Disney thing, like, just because quality. That kind of reminds me of like, I used to be super into Stephen King, still am a little bit, but I remember in one of the interviews he gave about specifically the Dark Tower comics, which are fantastic, by the way, if you were ever into the Dark Tower and haven't read them. He said, somebody asked him why he allows so many of his things to become adaptations, because again, there's a great range of quality between some Stephen King adaptations. And his answer was one of the most perfect answers I'd ever heard. It was just like, I've put it out there into the universe. I'm more interested in seeing what other people do with my source material when they put it back into the universe and their interpretations of things. And if it sucks, you always have the source material, which in my opinion doesn't suck, but my critics might beg to differ.
That's really funny because that's like the opposite. You just made me think of like Anne Rice. Anne Rice was like she was famous for like sending cease and desist letters to people who wrote like fan fiction from her.
Yeah, there were only actually,
books.
while she was alive, there were only two. It was just Queen of the Damned and Interview with the Vampire, right?
Right. And as much as I love Queen of the Damned, there's a whole book in between Interview and Queen of the Damned that only is touched on just a little bit. And what I need in my life is like a reboot where it's literally just like a Lestat miniseries, because I don't give a shit about Louis. Nobody does. And he's not even the main character after Interview with the Vampire. After Interview with the Vampire, it's all Lestat. Lestat is the focal character of the entire series.
Yeah, that was my understanding. I've never read or actually never seen any of the movies. But I always remember, like, when I was super into Magic the Gathering in, like, 7th grade, Inquest put out these, like, 8 legendary Magic cards that were not legal in tournament play. They were just, like, rando fantasy characters developed into cards. And there was a Lestat card that was available there. It was also, like, things like Sauron before Lord of the Rings was a movie series, Randall Thor from Wheel of Time, Conan the Barbarian. It was like all these, basically the main characters from any legendary series. And being that Lestat was one of them, I assumed that he was just the main character of the show.
Well, and he is. And so they've recently, I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, but they recently rebooted Interview with the Vampire following Anne Rice's death, which is interesting to me because I have been watching the new series and I think she would have hated it. Because she got so mad about everybody writing like gay fan fiction between Louis and Lestat. But the whole, like, that book series is like the gayest thing I've ever read in my life. And I'm just like, how do you not expect us to write gay fan fiction about this series that you wrote the original gay fan fiction for this series?
I had read too that Anne Rice surprisingly was like super hardcore Christian too, and like that probably flavored a lot of her distaste that people were taking her characters into. Like, do you think that Lestat and Louis would be an example of like queer baiting in literature?
Yes, but well, I don't. No, you know what? Let me take that back. I can't really say that it is queer baiting because I feel like intent has a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
So, like for example, in Supernatural, they constantly queer baited between Dean and Castiel, and then towards the end of the series, they like did a major fuck up where it was like, oh, that's like worse than queer baiting. You like made it way worse. And I don't want to. So, quick spoiler alert. Like eventually you get to. Are you gonna watch it?
Probably not. You can just say it.
You get to the end of the series, and basically, like it's in the last few episodes. Castiel and Dean, like Castiel's about to like sacrifice himself, and he's like, "You are, my life, and the whole reason that why I am the way I am is because of you, and I love you," and like then sacrifices himself. And it's like the whole series they baited us and then like killed him off, and didn't even give us an opportunity to flesh out that whole thing.
I've only just been recently introduced into the concept of queer baiting because I watched Our Flag Means Death. Have you seen that series at all?
I haven't. I've heard good things though.
It was fantastic, and like it's very clear, like, which was somewhat of a surprise, but it's established pretty well before the end that like Blackbeard and Steed are like romantically involved with each other. And I read a lot of reviews talking about how they deliberately subverted the queer baiting tropes by putting them together. And so I kind of went down that hole. And an interesting story about queer baiting for me is I think I accidentally wrote a queer baiting story into my very first feature film. Because what it reminded me of was, so my first feature film, which is on YouTube if anybody wants to watch it, it's Nowhere PA. It's available for free because the rights reverted to me 10 years ago after I made no money with the contract I signed for it. The plot is about like two best friends who, it was supposed to be sort of like a reverse Goodwill Hunting a little bit. Like one of them flunked out of college. He's kind of aimless. And the other one is kind of like a loser who just, can't get out of his own way. They both have their own reasons that are illustrated well, I think, because it's a character study piece. And basically the one friend, Mike, is constantly trying to keep Tim in his orbit. Like, the more Tim tries to escape or move up or get promoted, Mike just wants to keep him down and keep him with him. And like, everybody on the cast kind of realized that it was like the relationship between these two characters could very much be construed as gay as we were finishing filming. And the funny thing was, like, everybody realized it at the same time. And so the very last scene of the movie we were shooting, we had to like stop for almost a half hour because people were laughing so much, realizing that this had been written in there accidentally. And even one of the actors in the movie, August, who was a gay man, is still, I assume he's still alive, but he even mentioned to me, like, after we were shooting, he's like, you know how this might be a good pivot if you actually like made them kiss or something at the end, because I'm sensing there was some sort of like other energy between these characters that was totally unintentional, but like just the way the situations played out, there was definitely an essence of that there. So I can attest to the fact that you can accidentally write queer baiting characters
Fair enough.
in fiction.
What really gets me about, so you have the original Interview with a Vampire movie, which is a classic, and you love Brad Pitt, you love Tom Cruise. Kirsten Dunst did an amazing, child acting job. She played Claudia.
Was Anna Paquin in that movie too, or
No.
thinking of a
No.
just thinking of True Blood, I guess.
You might be, yeah. But the interesting about it is, in the Interview with the Vampire, the movie, you don't really get the queer undertones that are in the books. And it never they did a really good job of not bringing it up at all, basically. And so when you then go, I've been watching the new reboot, the new series, they attacked it head on. They were like, yes, Lestat and Louis were lovers. They were gay people, gay vampires, like that.
And you know what? That fits well. First off, that's awesome. And second, it fits well with like the mythos of what a vampire would be, because like tapping into a little bit of like Hellraiser mythology as well. If you're a vampire who's lived for hundreds of years, you are probably constantly searching to deepen your experiences. And even though like gay romance was not something that was as mainstream or talked about like during the time in which they probably transformed into vampires, I would assume that somebody who is like an immortal vampire would be more interested in exploring other aspects of themselves over an immortal life period. So
right, and it really does. When you read the books, there's really no question that there is a huge storyline of gay and queer undertones. There's even a part where like Lestat, he turns his mother into a vampire. And once he does that, there becomes this separation where he doesn't really see her as his mother anymore. There are two entirely different entities than what they were before they became vampires. And it's heavily insinuated in the book that they are lovers in some way, which is weird.
Yeah.
But I mean, it also makes you think in the sense of like, okay, well, if we're talking about vampire lore, when you become a vampire, are you completely separated from that mortality that you experienced before becoming a vampire? And I think that has a lot to do with the entire series of they're constantly battling this, who I was before versus who I am now. And am I at all what I was before I became a vampire?
This is a really interesting concept because I was just talking to one of my absolute best friends about this because he has a lot of movie ideas that he's like trying to like write into things. He has a bit of a condition right now that's keeping him from doing it, but he still occasionally will send me these long messages. And one of them was very specifically, he was thinking about writing a script that was sort of like Succession, the TV show. But the issue was that the main patriarch of the family, who had exhibited a lot of abuse towards his children, both emotionally and physically, by the time the reckoning has come, he's like a 90-year-old man with Alzheimer's. And the idea he wanted to explore was like the fact that you literally could not take any revenge on this person or get any sort of catharsis because the person that abused you is literally somebody who doesn't exist anymore. Like, this is just a shell of a man who doesn't remember who you are, doesn't remember what he did, and what kind of justice could you enact from somebody even like that? And I thought that was a really intriguing concept. Like,
I think justice itself is a really intriguing concept. I had it. The word was right there.
I knew what you meant.
Yeah, but I think about the idea of justice a lot, especially because I had plans to go to law school, and I was heading in that direction. So I think about law and the theory of law and how, is it so important to enact justice? And I think about that so much because when you start thinking about justice, you inevitably get to the thoughts of discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think of justice, is it necessary? Because when you look at justice and you say, okay, this person did this wrong thing, we then punish them and justice has been achieved. But has it actually put any positivity into the world? Has it actually been productive?
This is a huge debate with criminal justice in general, and actually one I get into my parents quite often. It kind of reminds me of, in Wheel of Time, they had a line about the Aes Sedai, specifically the Blue Aja, were sisters who went around the world righting wrongs, which was not necessarily the same thing as justice. And that was always a line that stuck with me from the Wheel of Time series, that righting wrongs and justice are not necessarily the two same things. So that's an interesting concept to me of like justice as, something that might not be the most constructive way to go about something.
No, I agree. I think that hits the nail right on the head. Whereas, justice, as I said, isn't necessarily a productive thing. When you enact justice in the traditional sense, it doesn't build a house, it doesn't feed someone, it doesn't save a life in a lot of cases. So, should we? I mean, justice, in a sense, like sounds like a good thing, but put in practice, generally just leaves everybody in a it doesn't make for goodness. But I agree that the concept of righting wrongs is definitely way more in line of what we would want to see in an ideal society of like, yes, this person was wronged, but that doesn't mean that we go to the person that wronged them and cut off their leg or something. It's doing right by the person who was wronged.
It's one of those things that, like, justice seems sort of like what they say about forgiveness. The forgiveness is more about the, the victim than it is the actual perpetrator of the crime. Perhaps justice works the same way, too. It's more for the victim than, the other person on the other. And this is actually, like, what I think I've had a lot of time to ruminate, like, what the main differences between liberals and conservatives are. And I think that the major one that I've encountered, like, having explored both ideologies a lot, is that conservatives inherently, I think, believe everybody is bad. And so the only way to save your world is to also be bad, but just not be as bad as the other people. And liberals believe that I think everybody is inherently good, and that the people who are just trying to be bad to be tough on perceived criminals are ruining the system.
I will have to ruminate upon that.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's so... I don't think you can take that mindset and apply it to every liberal or every conservative.
Oh, definitely not. That was just kind of like...
Yeah, I can see it. I can see definitely there are people who think one way or the other. I think there are people, and I don't think it's necessarily a liberal or conservative thing, but I think people tend to believe that either people are bad or people are good.
Mm-hmm.
And I've found that a lot in everyday situations, like when in my old job when I was a manager at this place, and the management team that I worked with, they're just like, well, everyone's gonna lie to you.
Yeah.
And there were some situations that came up where they were like, well, are you sure that person's not lying to you? Where it was like stuff where I had one person who was like, my sister was raped over the weekend and I need a couple of days.
Oh, God.
And I was like, oh, well, yeah, take a couple of days. That makes sense. And so I would go back to the management team and I'd be like, hey, this person is going through a pretty serious personal matter. And like I shared about as much as I could. And they were like, well, and it did come up, the entire situation with their manager. Like I told them, I was like, this is what happened. And they were like, are you sure that they're not lying to you? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, who would lie about that? And I just, I don't know, maybe that makes me sound like somebody who is naive, that, I just believe that it's not that I think people are necessarily good. I just think that people will take the path of least resistance.
Yes.
So if they're going to lie to me about needing a couple days off, they're going to say, like we just said before starting the podcast, they're going to just tell me you're sick.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to lie to me, like take the path of least resistance. So it's not that I think that people are, you know, honest all the time. I just mean that they're not going to lie about certain things because it'd be way more complicated than just saying the easiest thing.
Yes, you touched on something very interesting there too, because I had a coworker in the past, like a long time ago, who was like a habitual liar about everything. Like he would, he was a pretty big fuck up too, but would lie about literally everything to get himself out of any sort of situation, like as a snap reflex every single time. Like the reflex was just lie. He's an older gentleman too. And like after years of putting up with this person and just like enduring lie after lie and sort of rolling my eyes every single time, as did the rest of our team at that time, I was just kind of like curiously thinking about what would lead somebody to do something like that. And it dawned on me, like, this is a person who doesn't deal well with uncomfortable situations. So, like, every time he fucks up, the path of least resistance is just to lie about it and get out of the situation as quickly as possible. Like, don't worry, because a lot of the lies he told were things that you weren't even reasonably going to get away with 20 seconds from now. But his first instinct was just to run and get out of this uncomfortable situation where you did something wrong as quickly as possible. It's this future person's problem. It's not your problem right now. So just get out of it as quickly as possible. And I think that's what really led him there, was that like he was taking the absolute path of the least resistance by lying all the time. So I think that's an interesting concept. Like humans are more inclined to take the path of least resistance in most cases.
And as I think I made clear, like I don't think that necessarily has a moral value upon it. Like I don't think that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, because I just think I think it's evolutionary.
Yeah.
At that point, where I don't think anyone is maliciously trying to be one way or the other. I just think that people are going to do the thing that hurts them the least and causes the least amount of stress.
Yeah.
And in some cases, they might not make the best, what you would imagine to be like a moral judgment call in that scenario. But, you know, I find that I'm more empathetic to people when I can not sense like any maliciousness behind their actions. Like if I've been a manager for almost a decade, I've had people call me and be like, I'm sick. And I know they're not sick, but they're lying to me for a reason. And they are kind of, you know, sparing themselves the emotional trauma of that conversation of saying like, this is what I'm going through. And I find it happens a lot when you talk about like mental health too.
Oh, yeah. People
are going to say I'm sick when they honestly just need a mental health day. And thankfully that's become more mainstream, more accepted. As I've evolved in how different places I worked for, they'll tell you like as a manager, you know, if these are the acceptable things that you should excuse somebody for if they need some time off. And mental health over the last 5 years or so has become more prevalent in those conversations, like from a management standpoint.
Yeah, there have been a lot of days, like since the concept of a mental health day has popped up more for me, there have been a lot more days where I've never actually just taken a day off sick-wise for mental health. I'll sometimes use a vacation day or something if I have a day where I'm not inconveniencing somebody to take off. But as a general rule, I try to like, just because of duty and like not wanting to inconvenience people, I try not to call off on days where it's going to change somebody else's trajectory for their day.
I'm that way too, but I'm going to say for you and anyone who's listening, I highly encourage you that if you need to take a mental health day, take it. But what I'm getting at, don't take a vacation day. Take it as sick time. That is the best thing you can do to, first of all, you know, protect your vacation time. I mean, there's no reason to take a vacation day if you're not going on vacation. That time should be your sick time, and that's coming from a manager.
I was going to say, you coming from a former HR manager specifically.
Like that, and especially now is more accepted use of sick time. Is that also falls under mental health, falls under your sick time in most cases now. And if you're not sure, check with your HR department. But it's become more recognized, and so make sure that you're not using your vacation days for a mental health day. That's not fair to you, and that's not what it's for.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for explaining all that too, since it is your area of expertise as well. So
Yes.
I'm the only one in the room, so I'm the only one who can clap.
No, thank you. No, but I mean, it's just so important, and and it has become so much more accepted. Like, if you work for a company that says, don't take a mental health day, I'd want to know what company that is, because they would be crucified.
Yeah.
If it got out. So go to the press.
I think that's become like the biggest revelation over the last couple of years, is that people really don't have to work as hard as we've been working. Like, a big thing I remember specifically with my dad is that like his family would take a vacation like when he was a younger man, like every year to New Hampshire, and he said there were a lot of years he just didn't go because there was too much work to do in the office. And I'm like, Dad, there was no way that there was too much work to do in the office. Like, use your vacation time. That's what it was there for. And like, some of those family members are deceased now, and like, you never know when the last time you might see somebody is going to be. So why not use the time that you use seeing people in a situation like that is significantly more meaningful than whatever small amount of work you would put into the office, because your office doesn't appreciate you. Like, that's
you're
just
replaceable.
Yeah.
That's one of the main things. And what I've loved to see in the workplace over the last couple of years, and it's all over my TikTok because the algorithm works. And what I've seen is that it's become way more, the environment that you find yourself in the workplace has evolved and become much more of something where people have realized that you need to make the workplace a positive place.
Yes.
First of all, because if you don't, there is another company that is, and they will leave you for that other company. Options for workers have skyrocketed, especially since the pandemic.
Yeah. The Great Resignation and whatnot. So.
Right. And so if you're not taking care of your employees, you're going to lose people. And we've seen exactly that, where companies that aren't paying their employees enough, where they're not offering enough benefits, enough time off, they are suffering, and for good reason. And, we've talked about this before in the sense that, like, if you can't afford to take care of your employees, you can't afford to be in business.
Exactly. That was a bit of a controversial thing that we talked about on that VidJam set, too.
I stand by it.
I stand by it.
I'll go to blows for it, too.
Me too. It's like I said, it's like tipping. If you can't afford to tip, you can't afford to work here.
Exactly.
So I was, like, 10 years ago, I was actually going for my MBA before I moved to California, and never finished it, which is probably something that's going to haunt me the rest of my life. But lots of the management courses I took had really interesting insights into how to like take care of employees if you are a manager, which I've been a manager about half the time I've been employed, and sometimes I'm the follower like I am now. But one of the things I remember specifically was like, you have to make your employees actually feel like they're invested in the success of your company. Like, if you use the thing they specifically used is like because I said so is the worst thing you can say to any employee.
Exactly.
Because it makes it feel like they have no, like, they're just an automatron in a cog that can be easily replaceable, like you were saying, and they're not going to do a good job. But if they feel like they are integral to the success of the overall operation, they take ownership of the actual work that they do. And like, this is an interesting thing I think has come up, especially as like in the arts fields have diversified. Like, we all do stand-up and improv and filmmaking for, like, we don't do this for money. And it is a lot of work to do all these things. And it is fun. But I think more than anything, you feel like you're involved and invested in the overall success of a movie, an improv group, a play, or like a stand-up set. So it's satisfying to you to do that for no money because you feel like it's making a difference and you have a control over something. And I think jobs can actually be the exact same way. Like, you can have people invested in the success of a company by giving them a little bit of a voice in the way that you're doing things, rarely holding firm. Like, I think pulling the boss card is something that should be used only like in the most extreme of situations and things like that. And just taking care of your employees in general.
It's about ownership, giving your employees ownership over their position and how their position contributes to your overall goals and missions. That's what it's about. And the managers that are successful will recognize that. And what you have to do as a manager is understand that each person is motivated by different things. You're not going to be able to put a cookie cutter management style upon every single person that you work with. And there are some people out there that are okay with because I said so. And what's really funny is for me as a worker, I was raised under because I said so.
Yeah.
And so I'm just very used to doing what my boss tells me to do and not really like I understand that that's why I'm there and that's why I'm being paid. So I will say that as a manager, it is kind of frustrating when someone, when I'll give direction and they'll just kind of like completely blow me off and I'll try to explain and they don't want to hear anything. So that I that's a little different than, the because I said so. It's more like I have explained it to you and you just get like getting people to buy into what you're saying sometimes does not work. And it's because they have different goals than you do.
Yeah, I've actually had this problem with bosses in the past too, because I'm a fairly logical person, and if I suggest something, I have a very good reason for it and can explain this reason in 5 easy steps. And sometimes my boss just does not understand what I'm saying to them. Like this has happened. It's happened in production all the time. Happened while working at Hershey Park for sure, because like the promotion system there was not exactly merit based. It was more like who's been there the longest. So that was a fun thing. But what I was getting at, one of the books I read in business school actually suggested, and I think this is terrible advice, by the way, but I still think it's amusing, that rather than use a because I said so, lie and make up an excuse that seems convincing. And the logic behind that was your employee, if you can come up with something that sounds reasonable, they'll accept it more than a because I said so. But I think the inverse of that is if you can't explain a good reason for something, maybe you shouldn't be doing it.
No, that's fair. I think something that's so sometimes it's the common sense things for me. Like for example, in my last job, I had an employee that I was supposed to, and it wasn't a write-up. I'm going to put that out there. It wasn't a write-up.
No write-up.
It was a conversation, what would they call it, counseling. And it was about having, like, using their phone out in the call center, having, like, earbuds in, using their phone out in the call center.
All right.
That was a major issue because in that call center, they were handling, like, private customer information. There were times where customers were updating, like, their billing information, and so you'd have, like, credit card numbers and things like that. And so you shouldn't have your phone out.
No, definitely not.
In that scenario. And it's also has to do with, like, 9 out of 10 jobs don't want you to be on your phone during work hours. It's pretty standard across the board.
I think so.
And I pulled this girl in and I was like, hey, I just wanted to review the electronics policy with you. It came to my attention that you've been using your phone out on the floor. I just want to remind you that that's something that we can't have out on the floor, and these are the reasons why. And she started arguing with me, and I was like,
time out.
like, why do I have to explain this to you? Because like common sense dictates that you wouldn't be on your phone during work hours.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that I'm not on my phone during work hours? Not whatsoever. It means I've not been caught.
So, yeah, it's more like the instances in which, because this is something I did get a talking to when I first started working my current job, and they were absolutely 100% right, throwing that out there. I was on my phone way too much, and it was causing errors. Because phones are meant to be addictive. That's not an excuse. I should not have had my phone out. But what it sort of evolved into more is like there are certain times where it's just more acceptable to do it. Like if you have a lull and you're not actively doing something, but you have to sort of like parse out when you're actually looking at your phone and when you're not, basically. Like understand what the right moments, the moments where you have to be on, which are a lot of them, and most of your workday. But if you have like a certain lull, it's not the worst thing in the world, I think, for a couple of seconds, but not while you're taking care of somebody's billing information.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And in the sense of like the pacing of this work environment too was like there wasn't really an off time. It was they were answering calls and these calls were coming in one after another. So there was really no time when it would be acceptable to be on your phone.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, just make this easy on me. And because, listen, let me tell you something. Half the time when a manager asks to speak with you, they don't want to.
No.
Let me tell you, I would rather sit in my office all day long and not talk to a single person.
It's the path of least resistance.
Exactly. And so when I have to talk to you, know that it's just as upsetting for me as it is for you, and I don't want to do it.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that. Like, the times I had to like chastise people as a manager, thankfully, I haven't had to do it as a manager really since my Hershey Park days, really. Like, because all of my employees, I've generally, like, when I have been a manager, have done good work for me. Like, I've communicated with them, kept them in the loop and everything. But like, sometimes the more extreme ones, like at Hershey Park, I had to fire a guy for sexual harassment one time. Which he was totally in the wrong for. It was completely inappropriate. He fought back about it tooth and nail. He was like 3 times my age. And I was like a 20-year-old kid being like, no, this isn't appropriate. You have to hang up your whistle and get out of here.
It's really interesting as someone who has been in management for over a decade, like, or almost a decade, like being a 19-year-old manager, for example, terribly, like, just frustrating.
And a woman too, I'd imagine.
And a woman, yes. Both of those things. I can't tell you. There have been some cases where, I mean, I was in my, 19, 20, 21, and this was when I was working at Marshall's. And there were times where, like, a customer would start a fight with me. They'd be like, I want to see your manager. And I'd be like, I am the highest ranking person in this building. There was like, there's no way you're the highest ranking person in this building. I was like, you would be surprised. So what I would do is I had an employee, his name's Greg, shout out Greg. And he was an older man. He was a teacher. Mm-hmm. So he worked there like part-time. And I like went to him and I was like, Greg, I need you to come talk to this customer as the manager and tell them what I just said.
That's horrible that you had to like go to that.
And it's happened so many times where I just had to grab like the closest older man and be like, hey, help me out here. And did I ever tell you my favorite firing story?
No, please.
On the podcast?
Please tell us all your
Okay.
favorite firing story.
My favorite firing story. So this was when I worked for AMC Theaters. Mm-hmm. And
was it a federally protected Canadian goose?
It was, and I had to fire him for being an illegal immigrant. And I'm kidding. That was pretty good, though.
You're kidding? Shocker.
You're like, all right, let me tell you in your own language. Honk, 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 honk. Anyway, so I'm a manager at this movie theater. There were 4 managers. There was the general manager, mm-hmm. myself, and 2 other managers. All of us were very small women in our early 20s. Mm-hmm. And so, just to set the stage here, I was not present for this particular incident, but I was present for the firing. Mm. All of us were, and I will tell you why. So I had this employee who was ginormous. He was like 6 foot something. Mm-hmm. Just a huge guy, worked out all the time, very intimidating. All of us were teeny tiny little small people. And so I hadn't been working there very long, and I already knew that he wasn't my favorite person. Mostly, and it wasn't even like a personality thing or like that he did a bad job. It was because it came to my attention that he was intimidating one of the other managers who was smaller than me, like literally 100 pounds soaking wet. And he was like cornering her and like questioning her on like managerial decisions and stuff like that. And so that had already come to my attention, and I was watching him very, very closely. Came down to a time when I wasn't there, and movie theater's fine, everybody's fine, he's there. All of a sudden the fire alarm goes off. So everyone evacuates, goes out into the parking lot, and goes through the whole process. This employee pulled his car to the fire lane in front of the theater, blasted Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire" from his car, climbed up onto the roof of his car, took off his shirt, and started cowboy waving it around his head.
Oh, man.
For everyone to see. And it was caught on video.
Question, if you had not been a manager, would you have found this funny?
Probably not.
Oh,
I don't know. Maybe. I would have been, I don't know. I'm a pretty straight edge. I know I don't look like it, but like I can be kind of strict on things. Like when I was early on in my manager years, I was by the book. I didn't do any leeway for anything. I was very strict. So around this time, I probably would have, even as like a moviegoer, I probably would have been like, "You're in the fire lane. Get out." like I'd probably like get in the car, start it for him, and speed off.
Is this what he got? Is this what he got fired for, by the way?
No, Hal. He got fired for something else. No, this was 100% why he got fired.
I don't know. It sounds like there could have been something to top this in escalation mode. Like,
No, this was it. And the whole thing was like there were customers there. And so, first of all, he was stripping, basically, in front of the customers, taking off his shirt and waving it around his head. He was in the fucking fire lane and, like, was making a whole joke out of what should have been a serious situation and should have been him, like, following the right procedures for an evacuation due to a fire drill. Mm-hmm. So all of those reasons together were why we fired him. So that is my favorite incident of needing to be fired. The firing itself was not entertaining whatsoever, but we came together as like a management team. Remember, we got 4 very small women in their early 20s.
Who probably all don't weigh as much as this person combined.
No.
So.
And like he was a very intimidating person. And so it ended up that, you know, we all decided like, no, we're not going to have just one-on-one firing. Like all 4 of us are going to be in the office and fire him at the same time. And then he proceeded to harass us for 6 months, or at least me. That was before I left. But there are still instances that come up where he is like, there was one time where he was hiding in the dumpster, trying to scare people after we fired him.
Didn't this person have anything to do? Like that?
You'd think.
It seems like that's a lot of time for very little payoff.
Threatening text messages. He would like call us from like spoof numbers and like intimidate us, and like we went to the police about it. I think he killed the geese. I do.
Yeah, well, that could have put him away for a very long time, as we've discussed. So
yeah, I wouldn't put it past him. But the thing that got me was that we went to the same university, and so like I refused to walk to my car by myself.
Oh, that's really sad. Where because of somebody's own bad behavior, you get consequences that you not only don't deserve, but like it was this person's fault that he got fired for all of the stupid shit that he did.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, like, you were talking about how you're more of a by-the-book manager, and I'm kind of, like, the exact opposite as a manager in general.
I've loosened up over the years.
But it's interesting, like, at Hershey Park, that totally got taken advantage of, like, as a manager. Like, people walked all over me sometimes, which is why they made me the firer. I think it made them even happier and more, like, whatever. But when I've gotten past a certain threshold, like, if I've been in charge of people production-wise, because that's been most of my... Those have been all the jobs I've been a manager for, like post college. The people who actually like are qualified to be there are there and are trying to work hard. I've never had an issue with anybody at all, like anywhere where like if they asked for a little bit of leeway and I gave it for them, they never abused it or anything like that. So I guess work culture really like I feel like that can make or break a work experience in general. Like people are less likely, I think, to take advantage of somebody if they're invested in the culture of a job. Like for AMC, like an usher, like there's no way that he's invested in any sort of success for the movie theater chain. It's not like if AMC makes $1 billion, he sees any more of it. So
right, no, that's true. Now as a manager, I've found that I've needed to be more strict because people will take advantage of me.
Yeah. It's also the male-female dynamic as well, so that's also not fair in your.
And I have gone toe-to-toe with some pretty rough characters customer-wise. That's where I've found the most conflict is with customers, and especially at AMC because all of my employees were mostly teenagers. So I was very protective of them. So if a customer started screaming at one of my employees, I would go up and I would be like, okay, no thank you. First of all, you are yelling at a child. So how about you and I as adults go have a conversation? And I would like pull them to the side and I would pretty much like ream them out for being disrespectful to a child who this is their first job and they're doing the best they fucking can. And so I would have that conversation with a lot of customers, and some of them were like, oh my God, you're totally right. I'm so sorry. And I'm like, yeah, you should be.
See, it was the exact opposite at Hershey Park. Like there were so many levels of like service managers in that place that customers who were misbehaving, which there were a lot of them, who would also yell at children, some of which would begin crying as they were doing this. Almost nobody ever like got kicked out of the park or reprimanded or anything like that. In fact, they gave them free shit. In fact, there was one time when I was working there that we had this elderly a gentleman named Tom Kennedy. He was a sweetheart. He was great. Everybody liked to work with him. And he was working at Tidal Force one day, and there was a kid who was too small to ride with his dad. Happens hundreds of times a day at Hershey Park. And the dad was so angry, he slugged him across his face, and Tom had to go to the hospital over it, because we're talking like, he was like a late 60s, maybe early 70s guy who was just doing this for fun in his retirement. And this guy just slugged him. And the poor guy walked around with like a black eye almost the rest of the summer, because it's tougher to heal when you're a little bit older too.
Yeah.
And that's like the only instance I can think of where somebody actually got kicked out of the park for something like that. And like it made me very unhappy.
I have no tolerance. Like, I understand an upset customer, but once they start being abusive, I have no tolerance. I kicked plenty of people out of the bank when I worked for PNC, kicked plenty of people out of the movie theater, because I have no patience for it. If you're going to be respectful and talk to me like an adult, then great, we'll talk. But if you're going to be like cussing at me, the minute you cuss at me, I give you one chance. And then if you do it again, you're out.
Yeah, the girl I'm seeing right now manages a hotel, and she runs into this behavior all the time as well. And we actually had this exact same conversation a couple of weeks ago, because like people generally are abusive to her staff. Sometimes they're drunk because it's a hotel. But a lot of times just people, as we all know, people treat service sector workers not the greatest ever. And that's her like line too. It's like, if you're abusive to my staff, you're out of here. I don't care. And that's, I can't believe we have to make that distinction, but yeah.
So long podcast short. If you see a female manager, don't fuck with us, because we will start a fight. We are willing to go to blows.
Yeah. And there will be other males in the place that can act as the manager, like in a TJ Maxx, for backup as well. Deputized manager.
I do that all the time. I was just telling that to one of my new employees. I was like, hey, by the way, so you might be my go-to quote-unquote manager if somebody causes me problems.
Yeah. Well,
because I'm small and cute, and people like to cause me problems.
Yeah. Maybe that's why you've never gotten out of a ticket either. So.
I think so.
I've successfully talked myself out of one ticket one time, and it was when I was working at Hershey Park employee party after a 12-hour day. It was like 3 a.m. He caught me going 5 miles over the speed limit. I explained to him what I was doing. My sister and I were in the car, both in our work uniforms, and he took pity on me at 3 a.m. Pity, I say, but, I appreciated not paying the entire amount that I'd made at Hershey Park over a 14-hour day.
No, that's true.
Well, anyway, so this has been an interesting episode. We've talked about work culture. Work culture is something I think we could talk a ton about.
Oh, yeah.
I had my own things I wanted to talk about, but we didn't even get to it because the conversation
was... next week.
Yeah, doing it. Like, something I did want to talk about, which this could be a preview if we remember to talk about next week.
I'll write it down.
Is, and specifically because the name of the podcast that was thrown out at one point was Recovering Gifted Kids.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit, too, about, like, how, raised expectations of life probably are what contributed a ton to my depression. Because, like, as I'm on the meds now, I feel like I'm actually just, like, feeling like I felt like when I was 20 and 21 years old, before the weight of the world worked me down. I realized the world was not going to be quite as my parents had sold me. So,
dude, that's actually a really good topic, and I'll actually lend some thought to it and write some notes, because I have some hard feelings about that. So next episode, Recovering Gifted Kids.
Yes, the Recovering Gifted Kids, about the highest life expectations and the depression that is followed from them.
Yes.
But anyway, thank you for spending the last hour taking a vacation with your workplace problems and your Anne Rice novels. But I've been Hal.
I've been Shannon.
And thank you so much. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday.